my life and my child and what really was most important had taken a little bit of a backseat, and I had to now spend my time in this hearing in this tiny conference room in a hospital because my kid was down the hall admitted for RSV. Welcome to A Different Practice. I'm your host, Lauren Lester, and I'm obsessed with all things business, well-being, and optimizing the practice of law for solo and small firm lawyers. I started my solo practice right out of law school, built it from the ground up, and now work 4 days a week while earning well over 6 figures. I'm here to share tangible, concrete tips and resources for ditching the legal profession's antiquated approach and building a law practice that optimizes growth and enjoyment. Think of this as grabbing coffee with your work bestie mixed with all the stuff they didn't teach you in law school about how to run a business. Pull up a seat, grab a cup, and get ready to be encouraged and challenged. This is A Different Practice. I didn't intend for it, but I have the most appropriate sweatshirt on to record this podcast today. It's super cozy, and I just love wearing it because it just makes me feel happy. But on the front, it is a great reminder, and it says, if it costs you your peace, it's too expensive. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to another episode of A Different Practice. This episode, I'm going to continue the conversation that I started in the last episode about why I almost quit the legal profession. And in that episode, if you haven't checked it out yet, pause, go back and listen to it because it gives you some background and insight as to some of the things that I had been struggling with, why I almost quit, and kind of what brought me back around. And today I wanted to dive in a little bit more into what I've been doing recently to keep my sanity, to keep my peace, to protect it, and to really make sure that I'm staying on the path that I had identified for myself, at least in the current time, in the profession that would work best for me. So I'm going to talk about some practical, small kind of daily habits that I use to keep myself on track and to make sure that I'm still focusing on what's important, not getting distracted by all of the noise. But before I go into that, I wanted to add a little bit to the story of why I almost quit, what kind of led up to that, and some of the things that had happened. And after I recorded the last episode, I realized I didn't include when I had to have a hearing in the hospital and how that really was the first moment, whether I realized it at the time, which I don't think I did, but looking back on it now, was really that first moment that things started to shift. So this is in the summer of 2021. My daughter was just over a year old. She was about 13 months, had just started daycare. For all of my listeners who have little kids in daycare, you know that it is just a cesspool of germs. So of course, as soon as she started to build her immune system. It was getting sick pretty frequently, which was kind of par for the course and we expected it. But one of the illnesses that she ended up getting and became much more serious was RSV. My husband took her to Children's Hospital one evening and they ended up admitting her. And she was in the hospital for about 4 days because she just wasn't getting enough oxygen. She wasn't breathing well, kind of all of the symptoms with RSV, which was an incredibly terrifying time. As any parent will know, we don't ever want to see our kids hurt, tied up to a bunch of tubes and laying in a hospital room and having the nurses come in and poke and prod and check up on a 13-month-old is just heartbreaking. It was just a really hard couple of days. We were just really scared. We knew our daughter would likely be okay, but there's always that risk. And so my husband and I were really stressed out too, not only because our daughter was in the hospital, but we had an older daughter and we're just trying to kind of make life continue on as best we could. We were really surviving and driving across town and taking shifts, and one of us would stay the night at the hospital and then the other would come the next morning, and then we would go back and be with our elder daughter and take her to school and make sure that her routine was normal, all the while still trying to work and just kind of keep life moving. And so in those 4 days, I had a case with a particularly difficult opposing counsel, and not difficult in the sense of necessarily working with her. She was generally pretty pleasant to me in her communications, but definitely started to gray the lines of kind of what was appropriate. Ended up filing a restriction basically against my client. And so all of this is kind of happening in real time while my 13-month-old is in the hospital, but it's a restriction. And so in Colorado, that's has a lot of urgency to it, right? It needs to be dealt with quickly. And certainly for my client, I wanted it to be dealt with quickly because he was not being allowed to see his kids. The allegations and the restriction were seemingly far-fetched, like almost so much detail that it seems maybe not totally based in reality, but certainly the court took it seriously. And so there was a moment as I'm trying to care for my kid who's very sick in the hospital. I am trying to work on this case and get some movement. And there was a moment where the other attorney asked to have a phone call to see if we could reach a resolution, which is always my goal in any of these cases, no matter kind of what the situation is. But I didn't have anywhere to go. Like I was in the hospital room. I didn't want to leave my daughter. She was sleeping, but just as a mom, I didn't want to leave the room with her. And so I ended up in the bathroom, kind of quietly having this phone call. And I remember sitting there as I was listening to the other attorney, who was one of those resolution calls where it was sort of their way or the highway. There wasn't a lot of real negotiating, kind of real trying to find some common ground. So I was a little bit frustrated by that. But as I was sitting there listening to her, share her client side of the story, her position, I thought, like, my kid is just on the other side of this door, pretty sick. I feel awful as a mom that I can't just fix it for her. I just want to sit there and rub her back and be next to her crib in case she wakes up. I don't want her to have a moment without me. And I'm sitting in this bathroom dealing with this case that, quite frankly, should not be at this point. This motion should not have been filed. This seems like a little bit of an antic. It's a little blown out of proportion. It probably isn't based in any sort of truth. It's just everybody doesn't like dad. And so they're kind of coming up and stretching the truth a little bit. Sitting there sort of realizing, like, this is ridiculous that this is what I'm doing. I was disappointed in myself, frustrated that I had let it get to the point where I'm choosing a phone call over my kid in a way, which was not what was happening, but in my brain at the time, being sleep deprived and stressed and all the things, that's the narrative I started to say. And so we hung up the phone call, and then it ended up the court has to have a hearing on this restriction pretty quickly. And so the hearing got scheduled for a couple days later, and my kid is still in the hospital. She can't be released yet. Like, she's not better yet. And so I'm trying to prep for this hearing and end up having to go out to the nurses station to ask them, like, is there a room I could sit in to have this hearing? Nurses were so gracious and said, sure, there's kind of a conference room over here that you can use. So I go in there and set up my computer and the one desk in there and pull the chair up and get my notes out and ready for this hearing. And I remember taking a picture of the setup because even at the time, it felt insane to me that my life and my child and what really was most important had taken a little bit of a backseat, and I had to now spend my time in this hearing in this tiny conference room in a hospital because my kid was down the hall admitted for RSV. So I ended up having the hearing and the case eventually resolved and settled, but it was a real turning point, I think, for me Not at the moment because I was so in the middle of the trees, I could not see the forest, but it was a real wake-up call, and I think planted the seed of what I talked about in the last episode about what is this all really for? What am I chasing? What am I giving up my time for? Where am I making choices about priorities that maybe don't align with the choices I want to be making? So I wanted to add on to the last episode to share a little bit more context about kind of the events that had happened that led me down the path that I went on. But one of the things that has certainly helped me since making the big change of changing my services, getting out of those highly contested, conflict-ridden cases, not dealing with opposing counsel who really just seem to be there to create problems, not really solve them, for whatever reason. Personally, I think it has a lot to do with the way that they bill and make money. The more time they spend, the more money they make. So let's think of things to spend time on this case. That change for sure has had the most impact. But in addition to that, I've made some small tweaks just in terms of habits or the activities I do every day or the way I go about working, whatever you want to call them, that I find really have helped keep me on track, keep me focused on what's important, because there is still a lot of noise. A lot of that noise comes from clients. Sometimes it comes from prospective clients who are banging down the door saying, please, I want to hire you. Sometimes it comes from other lawyers. Like, those pressures are always going to be there. Just making the decision to tweak the services I provide didn't make all of that go away. So it's really important to me to do small things every day to continue to strengthen that muscle. So I wanted to share some of those things in case they are helpful, or you've been looking for maybe some tools or some small tweaks you can make that may make a big difference. I will plug, if you haven't read it already and are interested in just how to create habits that stick, how to change your behavior in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming, that can be done incrementally so that it lasts long term. Atomic Habits by James Clear is a fantastic book. I think it has been on the New York Times bestseller list for like years now at this point, but there's good reason for it. So if you are kind of looking for a little bit more of the science and process around establishing habits, if you've been wanting to make a change but just aren't sure how, that's a really great resource to check out. Here are some of the habits, behaviors, approaches to work that I have been implementing in the last 6 months that have really made a difference for me. The first is taking control of my schedule, of my time. That really was the theme, both in the story about having to take a hearing in the hospital while my kid was sick, even in the last episode, that kind of the realization that that's all we have is time. It's finite. We don't know how much we get. We all hope it's a lot, but it's a finite resource, and it's not something any amount of money can buy. I didn't want to get to the end of my life and regret how I had spent my time. So that goes into the small things of being really zealous about my schedule and my calendar and how I spend my time throughout my week. So it comes out in a few different ways. My overall schedule is I generally work Monday through Thursdays. Fridays, I try to take off, at least from the law firm. It gives me a mental break. I tend to do the chores about my life. So I go grocery shopping or run to Target if my kids need something, and then be able to spend the time with my kids and my family on the weekends. But even within an individual day, most mornings, I typically get up about an hour to an hour and a half before my kids get up. And that's really just because I want some slow time to myself. I don't pack it with a bunch of activities. I'm not trying to be super productive. I just really find, for me, it helps me set the tone of the day by having a slow, intentional morning. I get up, wash my face, get dressed. I typically have a glass of lemon water that it was recommended to me by a nutritionist that I've been working with, and I thought she was a bit crazy, but there is something about it, that being the first thing that you consume after sleeping, that just for me has really been helpful. So I have my water, I make my hot tea, I love having a cup of hot tea in the morning. I just find it really peaceful and calming. So I do that while it steeps. I'm usually like making my kids lunch. And then once that's done and my tea is ready, I take it. And now, especially that the weather has been more warm, I spend some time outside. It's usually pretty sunny here in Colorado, which I'm really grateful for. But I get a lot of nourishment and energy from being outside and particularly being in the sun. So I go sit out in my backyard and just kind of face the sun and close my eyes and feel that warmth of the sun first thing in the morning. And then I typically do a quick meditation. My favorite meditation apps are, I love the Daily J, which is in the Calm app. It does have a subscription to it, but I'm a big fan of Jay Shetty, and he does these like 6 to 8 minute meditations. He starts with a thought for the day. It's just kind of something to reflect on. And then the meditation is just a couple minutes at the end. But there's just something about the way that he approaches sharing wisdom and connecting old philosophies with today's kind of modern world that I really just love and appreciate. Some mornings I do that. And then other mornings, depending on my mood, I'll also use the Buddhify app, which is a free app, and they do have guided meditations. What I love about it is none of them are too long. I think the longest one is maybe 20-ish minutes. So it doesn't feel overwhelming. They do a nice job of categorizing the meditations by kind of what you need. So some of the categories are like, I just need some presence right now. Some of them are just about waking up, but there's some really great ones around specific emotions. So if there's something that I'm dealing with either in my personal life or work that really just have kind of been ruminating on or has just triggered something, or I'm just having a really hard time working through it, I love sitting down with one of the Buddhify meditations and just sort of helping strengthen the muscle of being present and not letting that challenge consume me. So I usually do my meditation, go back inside, then my kids get up and I give them breakfast and get them ready and drop them off at their daycare. And then I take about an hour for myself and go to the gym. This is something I never thought I would do. But after becoming a mom, I really found that the gym is my refuge. It, in a very strange way, like just makes me super happy. And so I have a routine in terms of what I do each day at the gym, but that's like my hour to myself. I move my body, which really gives me energy for the day and just makes me feel better. And then I usually use the opportunity to listen to a podcast. I just love learning and hearing different perspectives. It really is just a great way for me to spend an hour doing stuff I love. So some of my favorite podcasts in this season are We Can Do Hard Things with Glennon Doyle, the Business Made Simple podcast with Donald Miller. So if I'm really feeling kind of jazzed about the business or want to hear an inspiring story about another entrepreneur, I love checking that one out. I already mentioned Jay Shetty. He has his own podcast, which is called On Purpose with Jay Shetty. So if I'm really kind of looking for some insight or some wisdom, I like listening to his podcast. The Goal Digger podcast with Jenna Kutcher is also really great for just productivity and setting goals. There's also a lot of entrepreneurship episodes on there, which I really love. And then Mel Robbins too has a really great podcast. So I kind of cycle through those. Sometimes I'll get recommendations from friends. So if you have any, please share them. And they'll say, check out this episode or this podcast is really good. So I just love having that time to be able to learn, move my body a little bit, and just kind of start the day off right for myself. And really what my morning routine does, I'm not a stickler about the time necessarily. I don't do all of the things every day. Life happens. I don't try and beat myself up too much about it. But my main goal is really to stay off my phone. So I don't look at it first thing in the morning. I don't check emails until I sit down to work. I don't really look at text messages, social media. It's just my time to start my day off focusing on the things that are really important to me. So that's my overall schedule. I come in to the office, I'll work, take a little break for lunch, and then go pick up my kids usually, or start dinner if my husband's going to go pick them up, and then have family time in the evening. I go to bed. I always read before I go to sleep. It just, again, is my way of winding down the day, doing something that just makes my soul happy. And then the weekends, again, I try and spend time with my family, stay off my phone, really not work unless I absolutely need to or there's something urgent that has come up. So within the working days that I have, another rule that I have really tried to implement is the times that I'm available for meetings. So my Mondays, although they are a work day, I really try with everything I have to not schedule meetings that day. That is my productive drafting, kind of churning through a bunch of work, getting updates to people. That's kind of my focus work day. I put my headphones on, I put on some chill music, and I just get to work. There's no disruptions in my day because of a meeting. So then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are my days for meetings, but I don't open up the whole day to meetings. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I have a morning block and an afternoon block. And then on Wednesdays, I only do an afternoon block for meetings. And that just allows me to have time to get through some of that work that needs to be done that has kind of come up during the week. And that's because when I have my meeting times, those blocks tend to get full. And that's both from client meetings. So my clients have a link that they can schedule a meeting with me if they need to. And that time is also available for consults. So that's one of the other rules that I've put in place is the number of consultations that I will take during those blocks. And that has really allowed me to make sure my time doesn't get totally filled up with a bunch of consults. So now my clients can't talk to me and I can't get done with their work. But on the balance, I am not doing only client work where my pipeline for sales is really drying up because I can't have any consultation. So it's a balance. It changes probably every quarter or so. I make some sort of tweak to it, whether that's adding more consult spots or taking away some. Right now, I do 2 divorce or custody consults a day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then I do up to 3 of my probate, estate planning, and marital agreement consults. So I could have 5 in a day, 3 days a week, which would be a pretty busy week, but it does allow me to just really be intentional about the type of work that could be coming in the door, the consults that I'm having. And I also know that they're only going to pop up on my schedule during those time blocks that I have set. As I mentioned, I also schedule essentially non-working time. I don't have a block on my calendar. I know some folks like to actually put a meeting on the calendar that says gym time or not working or family time. I don't like that because then it looks like my calendar is too busy and it's overwhelming to me. But I do make sure that I don't schedule meetings on times when I don't want to be working. So for me, like I mentioned, that's Mondays. There have definitely been times where I have gotten requests from clients and clients I adore, opposing counsel, consults, just anyone saying, hey, can we meet? I want to have a call with you. Can you do Monday? And it's really hard to say no most of the time. But I try and remind myself that I have never said no and regretted it, but I have regretted saying yes when I didn't want to. So every once in a while, it certainly does happen where I have to have some sort of meeting on a Monday. I'm happy to do that. And I know that it's my choice when I do, but most of the time, that day is off limits in terms of meetings. And so being able to know and stay really strict about my non-working time just makes my schedule so much better and really relieves the stress that I might have felt around not having control of my time. I'm very intentional about it and what gets scheduled when. The second habit that I have implemented that has made a big difference, although is probably the hardest for me to do, is funneling everything through a centralized to-do list. In other words, I try and stay out of email. Email can be super helpful and quick and makes it easy to respond and doesn't require a phone call, but it can also be all-consuming. There have definitely been days where I have found myself only in my email. That's all I have done is answer the email. And then by the time I've answered 5, there are 10 new ones that pop up at the top of the inbox. So staying out of my email makes me feel less stressed. It makes me feel more productive. It makes me feel like I'm focusing on things that are actually moving cases forward rather than just being a call and response communication between me and whomever is sending the email. One way that I have done that is funneling everything through a to-do list. I use ClickUp to manage my tasks. I have a task folder for every client. And then within that folder are all the tasks for their particular matter. I've set up templates to make this really easy to create when I have a new client that comes on board. And then I also have folders for things like admin tasks or personal things that I need to do, just so that everything is in one centralized location. Every task gets a deadline no matter what. And then all of my tasks also have a time estimate, just so that I can easily see the week coming up. Like, wow, Wednesday has way too much work on it. Like, I'm not going to be able to do all of that. How can I rearrange things? What is actually priority? What is actually ready? Sometimes things that show up on Wednesday aren't actually ready to go. So it just gives me a really easy way to kind of look and make sure that I can manage my workload appropriately. But what I do in addition to having those tasks for all of the things that need to happen in a particular matter is when I get an email, if it's something I need to do, there's a response I need to give, somebody's looking for something, I need to do some research about something, whatever it is. If it's not just an email that says, hey, great, thanks, I got it, and I just kind of need to have that confirmation and file it away, if I need to do anything, I send that to my to-do list. And there's a really great feature in ClickUp where I just kind of forward the email along and it goes into a catch-all repository that I created. And then I go ahead and organize it based on the client and assign a due date as need be, kind of when it needs to get done. And that way I don't feel like I have two to-do lists. I don't have both everything that needs to be done in email and then also my general to-do list for all of the basic tasks that a matter needs. Everything goes into ClickUp. And what I also do in my email is I filter any email that comes from the client's email address. There's a filter I set up at the beginning of a matter to put that email into the folder for the client. It doesn't get marked as read, so it still shows up as an unread email. So I see the little number in my email client. So I know that there's something new in there that I need to address. But what it does is it keeps it out of my inbox. So my inbox is typically filled with newsletters, announcements, like, kind of junky spam, nothing that actually has to do or came from a client. So then I feel a lot better about ignoring my inbox because typically it's not stuff that has any level of high priority. And instead I work through my to-do list. So the first thing I do in the morning is I open my to-do list. I keep my email closed, as hard as that is most mornings, even still. And I start going through my to-do list and saying, okay, here's the stuff I think I need to get done for today. Make sure that that's all still accurate. And then I start prioritizing, what client really needs to get something this morning because we've got mediation in 2 days, or what task needs to be done because the court is expecting something, or this client, I haven't followed up with them in a couple of days. Do I need to make sure that I do that today? Whatever it is, I start working through the to-do list and getting those items done. And as I bring up a certain client's case, so let's say I need to follow up with them, I'll look in my email for their particular folder. And if there's no new email in that folder, then I know the client hasn't reached out to me. But if I'm working on John Smith's case and I'm working on drafting a document for him, I will check my email folders and it says, oh, John Smith, there's one new email in there. So I'll open it up and then see what he has sent or what needs to be done, if he's just confirming something or if he's saying, hey, Lauren, I found out about this. Can you check on it for me? I'll go ahead and then add that to my to-do list and sign it a date based on when it needs to be done. So then I don't have to worry about that email, but I know that the work is still going to get done and I don't forget about it. So really working on centralizing everything to my to-do list has been really helpful. It helps me stay out of email, which is really critical. I have found a huge difference in doing that in terms of my productivity, in terms of my stress level in an odd kind of way, but it just doesn't feel as overwhelming. It's not this inbox that just never ends. And I feel like there's 100 things to do and I feel so overwhelmed because it's unorganized. It has been a muscle that has been difficult to strengthen. I still find myself some days like, oh shoot, it's been an hour and all I've done is be in my email. So I still definitely get caught up in it. But when I can stick to the system that I've put in place and the behavior that does work best for me, it really makes a difference. And lastly, the third behavior that I have really tried to work on and be a model for is to remind myself of the humanity of our profession. I talked a little bit about this in the last episode and mentioned that I don't use the term your client, my client, your client did this. You need to get control of your client. Your client is right. I don't use that language because at the end of the day, we are not in control of our clients. Opposing counsel, for all I know, may be telling the client, stop doing this. You should not be doing this. And then the client still goes ahead and does it. So me emailing saying, your client did this. I told you not to do that. He's out of control, right? Like that's not helping anything. And it's certainly not going to keep the other lawyer in the space of, hey, let's find a solution here. Let's work together and find some common ground, right? These folks are in the middle of something really difficult. There are 6 sides to every story. Nobody is absolutely right. Nobody is absolutely wrong. Let's work together to find a resolution. I find, at least from my personal experience, receiving your client, my client type of communication doesn't make me want to work with the other attorney in a productive way when that becomes so adversarial that it's almost at the level of toxicity. I try and model the behavior and use the client's names. Like they are individual people and say, John said blah, blah, blah. Or sometimes I'll say like, it's my understanding because I also know that the client is going to tell me the story from their perspective and they're likely, whether they intend to or not, going to leave out details that aren't helpful to their narrative. I recognize that that's a human thing to do. So I'm not going to come at the other attorney and say, Jane said that John is doing this, because there's probably another side to the story. And so I will say something like, it's my understanding that John has done X. Can you confirm that's true? If so, can we work to find a solution that works for everybody? Something along those lines that keeps the humanity of our clients in the mix and also just the humanity of me and the other attorney. I don't even like using the term opposing counsel because it just automatically feels like we're fighting when there hasn't even been a first hello exchange. Really reminding myself of that humanity I find helps. It is definitely not always reciprocated. As I mentioned in the last podcast, right? I have gotten your client is out of control. You need to control your client this, your client this. It's not nice to be on the receiving end of it, but I do strongly believe in being the change we want to see. I'll also just thank people a lot. Thank you for getting back to me. Thank you for responding quickly. Thank you for sending me those documents. Honestly, even if it's a snippy email from the other side, if it's, maybe one of the first couple, I'm not saying that holding a boundary and demanding a level of professionalism isn't necessary. But I do try and remind myself of the humanity and say, thanks for sharing John's perspective on what happened last night. It's my understanding, blah, 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 and go in from there. So really just trying to thank the other person I find is really helpful. And it also keeps me away from apologizing, which is generally not necessary. And then lastly, I really try and make it a point to compliment another lawyer that I'm working with. If they drafted something really well, or they included something in the red lines to a draft that I sent them that really enhanced the document, or even if they were just professional and nice and worked together and were productive, I try and make a point to send an email or pick up the phone. I have even sent thank you gifts. I sent brownies once, 1 year to some of my colleagues who I worked with on cases just to say, thanks for your professionalism. Thanks for helping these folks get to the finish line and find a solution that works for everybody. Thanks for making that draft better by your edits. I don't think that we compliment or thank each other enough in the profession. We're so trained to be adversarial and see everyone as the enemy before things even start, that bringing back some of that humanity that we are a human on the other side, and we have feelings and we have bad days and we're all trying our best, really helps keep that human element within the profession that I think we're lacking. Hopefully I have inspired some listeners to start doing the same. And I think if enough of us can change that tide, it might make a big difference overall. Those are my 3 habits or behaviors or routines that I have implemented since making the change to shift my practice a bit because of the struggles that I had, the challenges that I had the moment I thought about quitting. And these habits have really helped me stay on the right path and remind me of what's important and remind me to focus on my priorities and my definition of success and drown out a little bit of the noise. It doesn't always happen. I definitely have days where I am terrible at all of this. It's just a bad day. Everything just kind of sucks. I'm all in my email all day. I didn't get to the gym. Like I'm scheduling stuff on times I don't want to, right? Like it happens. I'm human. But I do take each day as another opportunity to try again and get just a little bit better, or at least just have it be a day that I give myself some grace. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully you could take some nuggets and implement them either in the way that I have, or maybe they have inspired you to do something different in your practice to make things just a little bit better, reduce the stress level, feel like you have more control of your time. If you did find this episode helpful or know someone who may benefit from it, it takes just a couple of seconds, but it would mean a lot to me and would be a great benefit for the podcast to share the episode with a colleague who you think could also benefit. And if you've got an extra 10 seconds, if you could rate the podcast and follow it, not only will you always know when there's a new episode out, but it certainly gives the podcast a boost to be able to reach more attorneys who are looking to build a practice that they love. As always, I appreciate your time and the time that we spend together. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, keep building. I'm over here giving you a virtual high five because you just finished another episode of A Different Practice. For more from this episode, head over to adifferentpractice.com/podcast for show notes and links to resources. If you found this episode helpful, let me know by leaving a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you're looking for even more practical tools to optimize your law practice for growth and enjoyment, be sure to sign up for our monthly newsletter. The link is waiting for you at adifferentpractice.com/subscribe. I can't wait for you to tune in next time. Until then, keep building a different practice.